Welcome to the Worker Co. Podcast, Minnesota edition. The Worker Co. Podcast exists to tell stories of employee ownership, to be a resource, expanding imagination for and access to broad employee ownership. We tell these stories because we believe employee ownership is a powerful tool to lift people out of poverty and create wealth for workers. I'm thrilled to introduce our guests. Shane Stolp, to my left, owner and CEO of Wescom Inc. Shane is an experienced, business-minded leader with a deep passion for leading teams to do what they enjoy while being rewarded greatly. He is committed to building lasting relationships on a set of strong principles, hard work, and safe work every day at Wescom. He develops teams that motivate one another to create higher standards of ethics, work standards, and safety practices in the energy industry. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce you to Kirk Lindemann from Eide Bailly. Kirk specializes in employee-owned companies, focusing on employee stock ownership plan, ESOP, transaction advisory consulting. A firm-wide resource on employee-owned companies, Kirk has presented at employee ownership conferences, both locally and nationally. Welcome, Kirk.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Okay, let's get started today. Shane, tell us about Wescom and your role there.
Sure. Well, Wescom is an industrial contractor, and we provide services to the energy space, and we've been in this space since 2013. We got our start, and it was my brother and I working with a group of about 5 people doing incredible things in the great state of North Dakota during the oil boom that happened there. And now, today, as we sit, we're over 300 employees still doing the same type of work in industrial manufacturing. We're headquartered out of Duluth. We have offices over in North Dakota, New Mexico, and now in Wyoming as well. So we are just out providing the energy that America needs to make industry happen. We're finding ourselves working in shipyards, rail yards, mining, oil field. We're working in an egg farm. We're doing all kinds of incredible work energizing America. And we have been, on this weird trajectory as America has been through this re-looking at who we are as a country and where we get our goods and services. And we're thrilled to just be part of this huge boom that's happening across the country in the industrial space. We're really proud of our work in our opportunity zones as well, is what we call them. So, for example, we have a dedicated crew doing a lot of solar work in the state of Minnesota, working with utility companies and also homeowners and business owners getting solar on their roofs and their yards and the like to help with their costs of energy as well. So our core is industrial manufacturing, labor force, mechanical, electrical, and automation. And then we have those opportunity zones where we're just saying, hey, what else does America need good people to go out and do? And let me tell you, we have some really, really awesome people.
You also have quite a large family that I'm very impressed with.
Yeah, I got 9 kids, and I'm thrilled to have 2 grandkids. Number 3 is on the way, and yeah, they're awesome. We just celebrated one of our sons got married last weekend, so we're down to 6 at home, and it feels a little bit weird. But I won't lie, I'm enjoying the additional space in the home and the additional space in the driveway, because anyone with teenagers can understand that.
You are empty nesters with 6 kids at home.
We are, Kirsten, but you know what? Since day one, both my wife and I, we just really enjoy people. And I think it is so fun to watch a little person become a big person and go out into the real world and do awesome things. I'm very fortunate that my 2 oldest boys work for us at Wescom. And my daughter is, raising our family over in South Dakota. So I'm very proud to be their dad.
I'm sure they're proud to have you for their dad too.
Depends on the day.
Is your wife a saint?
My wife is an absolute saint. Absolutely. Yep. She's, when you're going through employee ownership, and we're going to get into a different conversation on employee ownership is a little different than entrepreneurship. Sometimes I think people get those 2 words kind of confused. But employee ownership can come with some difficulty, or entrepreneurship rather can come with some difficulty. And you better have a really, really strong partners along your journey, because you're going to need them. And she has been everything that one could ask for in that regard, for sure.
So did you start Wescom on your own?
So interestingly, my brother and I were approached by a couple of friends. They were exploring buying a company called Wires R Us in 2013 in North Dakota. And they didn't want to buy the company without some. I had a financial background. I'm a recovering accountant. And I know, Kirk, I'm sorry, but they approached me and asked me to come to work for them if they would buy this company. And so I was working in the government at the time. I had just finished college. We had 5 kids at the time. I was kind of recovering from PTSD of like a crazy life and said no. And after enough pressure, I told my brother, fine, I'll come to work with you and we'll go do this thing. So they acquired that company in North Dakota in November of 2013 with 5 employees, put Jeremy and I to work. And then by 2014, the business had kind of exploded. And it was up to like 20 employees, which is funny when we think we're now 300. But at the time, the other partners just said, boy, this isn't what we really thought it was going to be. And this is a little bit more intense than what we thought it would be. They were in the residential space before. And so they actually allowed Jeremy and I to get involved on an ownership standpoint at that time.
Did they do direct shares with you, or were they an employee-owned company?
No, they were just 2 entrepreneurs out doing great things, and they just realized they didn't have the time to drive the company forward. They seen that we're having tons of fun with it, so they said, why don't you start earning your shares? So we earned 10% of ownership each, so we had 20% ownership. And then the cycle continued where the business just kept growing and growing, and more cash was needed, more investments were needed. They had some other friends that were getting attracted to the business, and they started buying into the shares. So in 2019, we were able to purchase the other 80% shares. My brother Jeremy and I were able to purchase those shares from the ownership group at that time to become 50-50 owners in the company.
Wow, that's a great story. So you converted to an employee stock ownership plan, or an ESOP, about a year ago.
Yeah.
Do you want to share with us your journey? First of all, how did you even hear about employee ownership? And then just share a little bit about your journey, and then we'll bring in Kirk. He's not a recovering CPA.
Well, I think so. You know, I mentioned I was an accountant back in the day. I went to school, and in college, I remember learning a little bit about employee ownership. But I was always fascinated by entrepreneurship and the business journey that people took. And I found myself really a lot of times reading about companies that, like, the founder or the leader got to the end of the journey and didn't know what to do, and they just kind of floundered. And I really thought, man, if I ever had the opportunity to own a business, I feel like you could use it for something deeper than the purpose of the business. And that was always, I think, in the back of my mind. And I have a strong desire that people be financially smart and independent. And so I've done a lot of reading about financial things, even though I call myself a recovering accountant. It was a really strong foundation. And having a business mind, I fell in love with that whole concept, and I think I did a lot of research on it. But as Wescom grew from 2 people with 5 employees doing incredible things to like 100 people, 200 people, we're now crossing state lines. There's new regulations involved. You have deep relationships with corporate companies. You know, really a lot of our work is about 70% of it comes from 10 or 12 major corporate clients where we have a direct agreement with. Well, that comes with a lot of risk. You have client concentration risk. You have investment risk. You know, what's that business going to do? What if they fold? What if they don't pay bills? All of these things that your typical entrepreneur is like, that's too risky for me. Business is fun, but that's a little bit too much. So the other owners really started saying, you know what, the business has outgrown us. And Kirsten, I was having so much fun doing what I was doing, right? And even my own brother, Jeremy, was like, man, Shane, I don't know if I like this, you know? And part of the deal was I had 9 kids, he has 4, and his kids are incredible too. But, you know, you start thinking, we have these 150 employees who believe in what we're doing, and we're doing all these incredible things. But if the ownership group is starting to lose interest in this, how far can we go with this long term? And I just sat down with Jeremy one day and I said, this isn't going to work. We can't keep going this way. There's too much conflict. In a boardroom, we're actually discussing dividends rather than business operations. And that's not something that is super fun to do when you're trying to run a business. And it was no knock on the other owners. They're great, incredible people. And they have a really good work ethic and really helped me a lot in that. But Jeremy just said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, that's a really, really good question. We're going to go explore a few different options. And so privately, I was of the mind, like, let's buy out the other partners and keep running, because I'm only, at the time, 38 and having a good time. And in that journey, I found out, like, the different ways you can really transition a business. And one of them was private equity groups. And the prior ownership group was arriving at the same crossroads that I was, and they were saying, hey, we just want to sell out. And so they wanted to maximize their earnings from the business, obviously. And so they started exploring private equity groups. And every time we sat down with a private equity group, we probably didn't find the right people or whatever the situation was, but I didn't like it. It didn't feel like it was the right move for Wescom. So I kind of charted out a course, like, what if we could just buy out the other owners, keep this thing going, and then somehow get rid of our own ownership so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation 10 or 20 years down the road, or even worse, if one of us was to pass away and now my 9 kids are negotiating with Jerry and his wonderful wife as to how we should go forward with the business, right? And in that journey, reached back into the memory bank and was reminded about employee ownership and really started doing some deep research in 2019 as to how we could make that work. So yeah, and I think it's an interesting journey, but you have to have patience with, like, what was the end goal? The end goal for me was, how in the world do we keep this business going? And what does 20, 30, 40 years down the road look like for the business and for Shane? And both, when you looked at those two things, they both look like in 40, 50 years, you're not going to find employees that are hard to find today. How much worse is it going to be in 40, 50 years? And oh, by the way, these 40, 50 years later, like, if I care this much about people today, I'm sorry, when I'm 60, 70, 80 years old, their kids are going to be taking care of me. And I want their kids to be elevated and their parents to be well set. And employee ownership just checks the box in every which way. So that's really what it was, a combination of getting the other owners what they needed out of it, but allowing us to continue to operate in the business.
So were you already working with Eide Bailly?
No. So
okay.
I'm a researcher, and this I'm a questioner, so I always ask the question behind the question. And when I got into employee ownership in Jeremy, I was like, well, what does that actually mean? Well, good question, right? I don't know. I'm going to go read some books, because when you go to college, they teach you a couple of things, but it's really up to you to go apply it in the real world. And so I started reading online, downloading some books on audio. I do a lot of driving. It's a 10-hour drive from my Minnesota to North Dakota office, and back and forth I go. So I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and in that journey, just really got down and understood everything there was to know about ESOPs in my little brain, and just actually employee ownership. But I settled pretty quickly on ESOP. It made more sense for Wescom. And then from there, I found 4 different companies online, sadly enough, that specialized in ESOP consulting, because that was one of the first things I realized is you're going to have to get somebody who knows what they're doing to help you out and do a feasibility study. And so I placed a phone call to those 4 people and did some interviewing. And eventually in that conversation, Eide Bailly really won because they're from Fargo, North Dakota, and I was born in North Dakota. That's what I tell Kirk, but that's not really why. They really stood, it seemed like they understood what we needed to do. And it's a very unique business when you're in North Dakota in the oil field, which was a big portion of our business at that time. And they just understood that best of anyone. So they made a lot of sense. And that's when we employed them to help us out.
There was 3 others?
There was 3 others.
3 others?
Yeah.
Huh. First I've heard of this.
Right. The interesting part of it is a couple of those folks that I had interviewed followed through the journey, because I think that's a pretty tight-knit group in the ESOP consulting world, and there's not tons of ESOP companies. How many are there that we're talking about? In Minnesota, there's only a couple hundred.
Yeah.
250, I want to say.
240. So
okay.
I think that's pretty close.
So there's not very many consultants that are highly specialized in this, right? So I wanted somebody who understood our business, and that's where Eide Bailly really seemed to fit. And then the other piece of it is, after especially the feasibility study, you can then move on to a different consultant if you wanted to. But I realized the depth of Eide Bailly, what they had for resources available, made a lot of sense for me, just because there's a lot to take in.
Eide Bailly, sort of a one-stop shop, right? From when you explored, you met, and when you met Kirk, of course, it was just, okay.
Well, Kirsten, here's the thing. So yes, Eide Bailly as a company, yes, deep resources and an incredible group of people to work with. Kirk is a whole other matter.
A great team.
Yeah. No, I think so. There's so much, Kirk, you remember this, that there's so much work that goes into a transaction like that. Anyone who has ever started a business knows how hard that is. Now try and get out. Good luck.
Right.
That is a lot of work, right? And so you can dissolve, you can sell, or you can become employee owned. Well, I prefer the third. It also happens to be probably the most work because you have to do it right and you have to get it right. And in stressful moments, you need a partner who can kind of lighten the mood. And I think Kirk and I, we hit it off on that sense. You know, I give him all kinds of grief because he overcharged me for a little work. But hey, what the heck? I like his family, so there we go.
And the Fargo, don't forget the
The
Fargo.
North Dakota thing was huge. And I think, seriously, Kirk has connections. He had like the whole team. The other folks that I had interviewed felt like maybe they were lacking a portion of the team. You know, I appreciated your recommendations with the attorney and even the financial advice on the transaction in of itself and long-term accounting and audit and what that's all going to look like. They had it all.
It was a good fit. I mean, the cultures of our firms fit and the teams fit, and frankly, yes, we could speak pretty openly and transparently. And yeah, if we want to give each other grief, we would certainly do that. which made it a little fun because it was stressful, and we'll get into some of that in a little bit. But these transactions you just don't snap your fingers and they're done. And hey, we move like you're on our merry way. There's work to be put in, and their group did a great job, and I'd like to think we did the same, and it was a good partnership.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Kirk, the thing is there, you need to have a partner who can keep it light but still get the job done, right? And that's where I felt like we were able to connect. We could get on a video call. I mean, we were just talking about this. I don't know how many times we actually met personally, face to face.
I think
Twice,
yeah. Once in the oil field and once at the office.
Yeah.
Once at your office.
And this was a multi-year process for us. So lots of team calls, right? And you're trusting some pretty important things on somebody's hands that is, far away on a Teams call. So really ring the bell as far as I'm concerned.
So when you met Kirk over Zoom or Teams, what were some of those first steps he had you go through, and why do you think, and this will be for both of you, and why do you think employee ownership, as I mentioned earlier in the U of M study that Michael Darker and his team did, that employee ownership was below liquidating a company? What do you think some of the reasons are for that?
Well, I asked Kirk in one of our first meetings, what does this actually look like? I've read books, and some of them talk about feasibility studies, some talk about transaction, pre-transaction, post-transaction, trustees, valuations, like things that you don't deal with as you're running your day-to-day business, Kirsten. A trustee to me was somebody that, ran a church.
Right.
Well, otherwise, what's the point of a trustee, right? A feasibility study, isn't that what they do for environmental impacts? I'd never heard about a feasibility, all of these big words that he threw at, but he just dumbed it down into 3 steps. 1, is it feasible for you to be an ESOP? 2, what does that, if the answer is yes, what does it actually look like? And what would the outcomes be? And then 3 is, how do we execute? And once he broke it down that basic, and then he was able to provide the resources to do those 3 things, whether internally or bringing in other people, it was just much easier. Why I think people don't go that route, or why it's below dissolving, we're all running our business, right? Poor Kirk, I would jump on these Teams and Zooms calls, usually a little bit late. I'm frazzled. I maybe just came out of a client meeting or an employee issue, trying to find money to make payroll, whatever the situation is. And he wants to tell me about a feasibility study that might cost you $30,000. All right. So just like you have to invest in your teams by doing payroll and hoping your client pays you in business, sometimes you have to invest in hiring a professional, paying $30,000 to do a feasibility study, and finding out if it's the right thing. But it is an investment. And most entrepreneurs who've been blood, sweat, and tears growing a team come home at 2 o'clock in the morning from a long drive to North Dakota and went downstairs to do payroll, really don't imagine taking those earnings and giving it to a professional for a feasibility study. That's a hard pill, and especially you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So for me, that was a big barrier. The amount of the investment to even find out if we were a good fit. That was a barrier. And I'm not sure, what other business owners, when I ask people ask, oh, I heard you're an ESOP. Or people would say, leading up to it, I can't wait to find out in 10 years what it's like. Because they're scared of it. They just don't understand it. They don't know anyone in it. So they're like, I'm scared of it. And then if I have to pay money to do it, I'm out. That's my feeling, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, the terminology, just, you already mentioned it a few times, the terminology is foreign to a lot of business owners, and they're busy running the operations, which is right where we'd want them. The education has come a long ways, as you know. Still a lot more longer ways to go with that. And frankly, the more business transition in the press, I think the better off the ESOP concept looks, if you really flesh it out from start to finish. So, but you're right, Shane. Hopefully, there's a lot of good advisors out there that can, we'll call it, dumb it down and say, hey, here's what you're getting, and here's what it's kind of going to look like before you get thousands of dollars down the road, and probably more importantly, months down the road of your time, and you've lost sight of your business. So I totally agree.
And I think that even that terminology, if you just go read about ESOPs, you'll find words like your annual valuation and your valuation and your trustee, right? Or feasibility study and all these things. You may run into the word of warrants and earnouts and clawbacks, and you're just like, oh, anyways, I'm just going to go wire that well pad because I actually know how to do that. and I think about the folks who are in their 50s and 60s and have worked so incredibly hard. And I just know how much blood, sweat, and tears I've put in to get Wescom to where we got, that I don't know. I cannot fault them for saying, you know what, actually, I had a nice run. I made a little money along the way, and I don't know, my kids don't want it, so I'm just going to walk away from it. I think it's a shame because they can do so much better than that, but they just don't know.
Well, I think, too, we have 52,000 plus businesses in Minnesota with owners 60 or older. And we know statistically that one in four will not find a buyer. That means a business closes in a community, right? And if you're not in a metro center, even in a metro center, but you go out to a Pine City or Two Harbors and a business closes where they're already fighting for employees, that's a hard pill to swallow. And I think you're right, and I've heard this before, poke holes in it. It's that first kind of initial to get that valuation or feasibility study where people go, oh. However, what they don't understand is that they're going to have costs if they go right with just a regular buyer, or and with private equity, their legacy that they've built then can be changed, right? Everyone knows it, but some people get desperate and just go, I need out right now.
For sure. And I think, Kirk, even when we got going on our transaction, there was a lot of like, okay, we can do a feasibility study. We can tell if your business will work for this. But even to get to that point, they need to know, like, what do you project to do with the business? What do you think your future earnings could be, and so on. And again, going back to your 20, 30, 40, 50 person company, they haven't dedicated resources to that kind of a conversation previously. And you're asking me questions. It's like, I just plan to go to work. And I know I told you that many times. Like, Kirk, we actually just work. I don't know. That's a magic, right?
So we have your 10-year forecast, please? Your crystal ball, right? Yeah.
The 10-year forecast. Yes. Those are real things, right? But the deal is, if you're going to go with private equity and you want to maximize your payout from private equity, you're going to have those same exact conversations, right? And so I think it's important for business owners who are like at this spot to step back and say, well, it might take a while, it might be a big project, but there's no better time and place than right now. Because really, if you want your business to succeed long term and you care about your employees, this is an awesome way to make those two things happen.
And the costs are going to be there either way. Any method you choose, any business transition method, whether it's private equity, third party, competitor, or ESOP, the costs are going to be there. They're going to be different, but the key there is communication. And I think most service providers in the ESOP community are upfront with those conversations and what it might compare to if they did. If the sellers did go a different route, because that's a lot of those initial conversations. It was with you guys. You had another offer out there, and that was on the table. And the research and education that you did for yourself was key in that decision from our standpoint.
Yeah, I think too. Not only do you have to have all that forecast and all that business visibility and be willing to pay the cost, but then when you get into the transaction, they're always going back to like, give me section E.1, which is your organizational documents, right? And you're like, oh, come on, Kirk, I'm driving on Highway 2. Like, I don't know where my board meeting minutes are from 4 years ago, right? But these are real things that happen in business transitions. And for anyone who happens to listen to the podcast, newsflash, they are going to happen to your business. It's just a matter of if they happen when you want them to or when you don't want them to, right? Or else you just close your doors. So that was another thing that really played into our decision for Jeremy and I, is we both felt like we're still young, relatively speaking, that we could actually continue to operate in the business and do what we love to do and leave it in an even better spot rather than kicking that can down the road. It's when you have the oomph in you to do it.
But you still get paid back that fair market value for the company, and you don't have to exit then. I think a lot of people just see employee ownership as an exit plan. At startup for worker-owned cooperatives, right? Employee ownership trusts, you can kind of do 5 years in, but people can start maybe planning as they start their companies. These entrepreneurs, what are 3 things you would tell an entrepreneur they could do besides keeping good books? Because I've heard a lot of owners just have not really kept 4 years a board meeting. No, they don't have that anymore. So what would you tell someone starting a business or perhaps being in their mid-career and saying, hey, I can get paid back a fair market value and continue to work as still an employee owner? What would you think, both of you? That question for both of you.
Boy, that's tough. I think number one is set up your business to be bigger than you are. Because you know what? There's all kinds of problems out there, and we love to talk about these big problems and these big ideas to fix them. But let's get real. Every one of us has an opportunity to fix these kinds of problems that we see right in your own backyard. So, for example, I grew up in a family of 9. My dad only had a job enough to pay to put food on the table. That was the extent of his career. And that always bothered me. He took awesome care of us, but he did not win financially in that life because his employers didn't allow him to win. And the fact is, most people, even if they have a great 401k plan, they don't have the money to put into their 401k plan, right?
Agreed.
So if you see a problem, deal with it. I love financial freedom. And I want everyone that I come into contact with, but especially that pours their blood, sweat, and tears into my business, I want them to experience that financial freedom. So let's set up this business to be bigger than me. So yes, I might not take as big of a dividend, and I might instead make an investment into a bookkeeper to keep better track of my books. Maybe I make an investment into a consultant to sit down and say, hey, what should I be thinking about? I think we got lucky at Wescom actually because of COVID. We started talking in 2019. We were hoping to do a transaction in 2020, so we spent some time setting our business up for said transaction. But you don't know what you don't know. So start early. Go meet with a consultant. Go meet with somebody in that space and say, what are some of the things I should be thinking of? And don't try and solve those overnight. That's okay. You're mid-career. You got some years ahead of you, but put it in place. And I think that helped us, having that in place. So I would say, remember, problems they're solvable. Right in your own backyards, right in your own communities, starting with you. And that you are lucky to be a business owner. You have this incredible opportunity to truly change lives. Number 2, make an investment in that future. And then I think number 3 is don't think of it as such a difficult thing. It really isn't. I think, Kirk, we were negotiating with our trustee towards the end of this transaction, and it happened to be right around Easter time. And I was at home. This was on a Thursday night that we had gotten our final, we were going back and forth with the trustee. And I'm in my bedroom, and I called my brother on Friday morning of Good Friday. And I said, hey, Jeremy, you know what? What did we want out of this? We wanted our employees to have the right to the future profits of this company. That was our goal. This deal 100% gets us there. It's time for us to call Eide Bailly and tell them we're ready to sign. Those are 3 things that I would say.
Kirk?
Yeah, the three things, I think it probably applies to just all companies, before you're an ESOP and maybe after you're an ESOP is, I think number 1 is planning. You alluded to it a little bit earlier that a lot of business owners aren't ready basically for a transition because they wait too long. They haven't vetted out or educated themselves early on in the process or even what's out there. And that's one thing I commend you and Jeremy on is that you did a great job on that planning side, it wasn't like, hey, we need to do this tomorrow. I mean, we clearly didn't do it in in even a year, but we'll get into that maybe a little bit. And then the education. It's no secret that employee ownership isn't for every seller. I mean, that's well known. So the education, what does it look like if I sell it to my employees? What does it look like if I sell it to a third party competitor? What does it look like private equity? And I think you guys got to an answer very quickly, which I'm obviously biased, and I'm glad you did on the ESOP side of things. But so then I would say the third thing is, and this is like I said, non-ESOP or ESOP, is that development of the people. That developing people that allows them to do more fulfilling things, and frankly, you to do other more fulfilling things for yourself. So it's a great cycle that, hey, if everybody's in this together and we all have ownership, and hey, yeah, I am going to train that person instead of go home, or hey, I am going to do this, because they're all moving the same direction. So I think that's super powerful in any business. I mean, we're not an ESOP as a firm, we're a partnership, but that's the culture we have, because you have to train your replacements, and the higher tide rises all ships. And I think that is the ESOP concept in a nutshell, that management and developing people.
I should have said one of the things that I would tell somebody too is to grab somebody that's close to you that's not in the business to go on this journey with you. It is so incredible if you tell somebody, like, hey, listen to this crazy idea. Imagine if I could get out of my business from the ownership standpoint, but still do what I love. Because truthfully, I don't know that I ever loved this idea of ownership piece of it. Like, as an entrepreneur, right? I loved operating the business. And I wonder how many other business owners are in that situation. They love what they do. They don't love the business ownership piece of it, where the bank is asking for updated financials. Right? That's just not my thing. But it's part of what you have to do. So grabbing somebody to be like, hey, what if I could sell the business to my employees? They could all retire with hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank without putting any money into it. And like, bring them along the journey with you, because they'll hold you accountable to that end goal. Because it's easy to get sidetracked in all the minutiae of the deal.
Yeah, we had a discussion, it seems too good to be true. And that's a valid, I guess, on the surface, really, quote, stretch it. We talked earlier, and it sounds like it's too good to be true. And I can see where people, think of it like that. But once you dig into it, you'll discover that there's employee-owned companies right down the road, or your cousin or your neighbor knows one. I mean, there's a lot of resources, and I guess real life experiences, to your point, where you could talk to somebody that's been through that, been there, done that.
So I know you mentioned COVID. You were planning to transact to your ESOP. What was that like as you were working through the process, not only for you and your brother, right, and Eide Bailly? What was it like for you to start working with Kirk and his team in the time it took? And were there any uncomfortable parts? Were there any kind of pain points you'd like to share? Just so people aren't surprised or think this is some magic panacea and we're just going to go in and see Kirk at Eide Bailly and that's what's going to be done. So can you just share with us a little bit what that transaction journey was like for you both?
Yeah, I think, one is, don't ever forget, just like your business is unique, your experience is going to be unique. And embrace it. Embrace your own little unique experience. One of the biggest surprises I found was, an ESOP transaction, plan on this long transaction might take 6 months. Well, it took us almost 4 years, all right? But that was our journey, and it was impacted by a couple of things, mostly COVID, but secondly, we were heavily invested into the oil field contract labor force, and that, especially at the time of COVID and the recovery from COVID, there was an ESG movement that happened at the same exact time, and a lot of social pressure in that industry that just caused banks and folks that are involved in the transaction to give pause. So don't believe everything you read. Make it your journey. There will be a time frame, but make it yours and be comfortable with it, right? And so I think working with Kirk and having him, like I said, say, hey, let's just start with the feasibility study. We did that in late 2019, early 2020. And we said, yeah, totally feasible, check mark, right? So now next step is, what would it actually look like if we were to pull off the transaction? What are the seller outcomes? For Jeremy and I, what would it look like for us from a financial standpoint? What would the employees, what would that look like from their standpoint? And then what would the projection of the business be like? That was another couple-month process going through that deal. And in that time, actually, the trustee that we had hired and Kirk and his team came up to our office, and I had shared with our senior leadership team that we were exploring this and we want to keep it quiet. But, I think there was maybe 4 or 5 people in the room with us that come meet this team. I want you guys to gut check if we're on the right track, right? And I'll never forget, you guys had brought a older gentleman who had been out of the trustee world, or maybe was retiring.
Yep.
And he was in his early 70s, maybe even. And he looked around the table after we had met, and he told the team that you guys are really lucky because Wescom already has the feel of an ESOP. You guys already are acting like an employee-owned company. Now you're just going to benefit financially from actually being employee-owned. Because apparently there's times companies aren't there yet. And so I think from the time we met Kirk, I realized everything's going to be harder than what I thought, even though I had read all these. Because people, when they write about their ESOP journey, they write about the outcome.
Right.
They don't really write about the process.
Journey.
They don't write about the journey. And I'm a big believer in trying to enjoy the journey. So I tried to look forward to our monthly calls with Kirk. We did a couple of things. I told Kirk, hey, listen, this transaction is going to be bumpy because of everything he had told me. Like, we need 10-year plans, we need forecasts. And then after COVID, are you kidding me? Every bank is scared to transact anything. Everyone was scared. And in the industrial space, oil prices had went negative. People were panicking.
Lots of volatility.
Lots of volatility. So you need to come up with a way that you're gonna convince everyone this is a good deal that's involved in the transaction. And I remember telling our team, like, I am not, and I told Kirk this and his team many times, I do not want a deal that I'm dragging across home plate. To use a baseball analogy, which I drove them nuts because I did this all the time. I want to know what base I'm on, and I want to slide into home plate. I do not want to be dragging the team across the home plate, right? So I'd ask him, am I on first base or second base or third base, or am I sliding in home? Do you remember those?
Yes.
Because I wanted to know what that looked like. So to me, feasibility was between home plate and first base. Are we going to do that? And then first base to second base was possibly the most difficult one, which is how would you actually structure the transaction and what would the outcomes be? Between second and third base was okay, get the right partners involved from a financing standpoint, do all that. And then the slide home was actually executing the deal. But each one of those had their own little unique challenge. But for us, it was just really trying to make the deal work and convince people it was a good deal. And like I told my team, I'm not going to just try and convince them. We're going to believe it's a good deal. So if we have to give them projections and we have to figure out how we're going to be a diversified company and be a going concern, let's dig all the way in and let's do it. Let's prove everyone that tells us no, let's prove them that they made the worst decision of their career. And
His journey was an 18-inning, literally, case study. So it's very unique in a lot of different aspects. But I think one of the important takeaways that we saw is kind of to that meeting where you brought your key management, and there's a lot of different ways that companies communicate this, right? But you guys did it the right way. There was no for sure thing. Hey, here's what we're thinking of. You are the key people. We want you to decide. They already had the culture. And frankly, when COVID hit and all the oil price volatility and all the extra government funds that were floating out there for everybody else and whatnot, it was very confusing. But we all along knew that at some point it was going to work. Whether that was a year from now or 2 years from now, because of the culture they had created, the mentality that Jeremy and Shane had from a hey, we want to do the right thing. We want the employees to own this at some point. And frankly, we want what's fair for us too. You can't forget that as a selling shareholder. There's a balance between what's fair for you as a selling shareholder for building that and frankly, transition it to the employees. So but some people would look at your journey and say, wait a minute. COVID, oil field, didn't lay anybody off. You held on to, and this worked. But ESOP could work for anybody, is what some people might say.
I think, Kirk, one of the cool things is you and Ryan at one point had told us, maybe we should just take a break of this and just keep each other monthly. Mm-hmm. updated monthly as to how things are going. In 2020, after COVID hit, during that, the real pain of COVID, it was just like, you know what, we got a business to save right now. We're going to put this on the shelf. We're still going to do it. So let's meet every month and like remind each other like this is a real deal. And then Kirk would be like, hey, how's it looking? Here's what I'm hearing in the industry. Here's what we're seeing in the financial world of that. And that was super helpful for us to stay focused on that end goal.
Did you find, I'll ask Shane first and then Kirk chime in, what banks, sometimes, so for some employee-owned companies, the owner holds the note while they're being paid back that fair market value. Do you find banks were open to supporting your transaction?
The easy answer is no. I was so frustrated with banks. But Kirsten, I think it goes back to my particular situation. Again, enjoy your own journey, right? My journey was a weird journey. I never found a bank that believed in Wescom because we were in North Dakota working in oil fields, right? And people didn't understand that. And they didn't understand how you could go 45, 60, 90 days without being paid, and time and material work and master service agreements. And that was difficult for banks to get along. So we ended up, we had a bank out on the East Coast that was a business bank that was working with us pretty closely. And I told Kirk, oh, slam dunk, they're a business bank. They'll love this idea, right? No, they didn't love the idea. Kirk had some resources that he had referred us to. We had one decent offer from one of those banks.
Right.
But I think, again, we have to remember the context of that time. That was a tough time in the banking world. And what we ended up doing is I thought, all right, again, what's the end goal? Just keep digging. And I went and met with one of our local banks, and they had never done an ESOP transaction before. And they didn't even know, Kirsten, what the word meant hardly, right? Like they had never heard of it. And I had always kept an operating account there, and he's always been a great banker on a regular sense for us. And I just told him, hey, look, John, I think that your bank is missing out on a huge opportunity here. We've proven ourselves, and maybe we can do some sort of a financing share to get this deal across the line. And boy, they just really stepped up to the plate. I'm so proud of what they did. He went to his board of directors and he's like, hey, we are going to miss out on this incredible opportunity coming down the pipeline, not just with Wescom, but with other people in the region. And I can't say enough about him and the work that bank put into the transaction.
And they're reaping the benefits of that. You've probably done other things with them, whatnot, and these other banks that I think all these banks loved Wescom and the interviews and the discussions and whatnot, but there was just volatility there that they weren't comfortable with, and they found a partner. That's the important piece, is finding partners that believe in you. We believed in you. You clearly believed in yourself, and you were going to make this happen, and you were going to be profitable. And like you said earlier, we'll show them.
Yeah.
And now here we are.
Well, I think maybe that's a piece, Kirk, that I should say is that look in your own backyard.
Yeah.
These transactions, all you're doing, if you're a profitable business and you're a going concern, you're simply cashing out the equity of the business. And banks are willing to do that, especially if you'll take some of the risk on yourself. So in our situation, we financed, I don't remember the exact numbers. Was it 50% roughly? 50% of the transaction was financed with the bank, and 50% was financed on a 10-year note with Jeremy and I. And that really works out well for us. Like I'm still involved in the business greatly. Jeremy is still on our board of directors. He still keeps tabs on what's going on. It forces us to be really good in our business, which ultimately drives shareholder value, which in the end ensures that our employees who have believed in it leave with a balance in their ESOP account. And
you weren't going anywhere. I mean, you weren't going anywhere from an operational standpoint. There's a lot of comfort there. And I would say generally banks are warming up to the ESOP concept just through education and what's out there. They know they've maybe financed a company that's an ESOP, and they see the inner workings. So I think that maybe friction is gonna loosen a little bit. Now I can't tell you what rates are gonna do, so that's a whole nother discussion. But I think the banks are getting on board and they're learning this ESOP concept and very acceptable.
So do you feel like our business was unique in the sense of the business style, or have banks actually increased their optimism about ESOPs? Like, was that a thing because of our specific business, or was it that time? Because that was a terrible time.
Time. Yeah, because the profits were there, right? Yeah. I mean, the profits were there, the numbers were there. They just, during COVID
Yeah.
In oil field, there's a lot. I mean, I don't work at a bank and don't pretend to know what goes on, but all those committees and whatnot. So once again, if you find a partner that maybe there's a little less of that and more belief that it's going to be an optimal outcome.
Somebody who understands you and your community.
So Kirk, we've talked about culture a lot, and one of the things I heard you mention numerous times was how Wescom and Shane and Jeremy, right, how they already had that culture built. Can you describe a little bit of what a successful culture would look like coming, say, someone calls you up, Kirk, I'd like to explore an ESOP, and you start looking. When you were with Jeremy, I'm sure you said, oh, wow, really great culture after you got to meet his leadership team. What would you say is a culture in a business, the way it is run and the way it is led, that would be a good fit for employee owned without doing a lot of growing and changing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different culture styles in business, but I'll go back to that culture that inclusive, right? Includes the main management, or maybe everybody in your case, and empowering, right? It's not a micromanaged culture where the one person makes the decision. It's a team effort, and everybody's working towards the same goal. So culture, you'll hear that probably overused in the ESOP world, but it really is true. It has to fit. It has to fit for from the selling shareholder all the way down to the person that started yesterday. If that culture is there, sky's the limit with employee ownership.
So let's talk about, you've now transacted. You're an ESOP. Are you a whole year old now?
We are.
A whole year old now. What has changed for you? Still CEO, right? Running the company, as far as you loving to work and be those boots on the ground. What has changed for you? What do you think has changed for the employees in the community that you...
I don't know. People are always like, is it what you thought it was going to be? I don't even know what I thought it was going to be. Because what I thought about is 20 years down the road, I'm not there yet, right? Nothing really has changed. Like, I still get up, go to work, and have an incredible time working with a bunch of awesome people. So a couple of things that are different, right? One is a lot of education as to what employee ownership means. What does this actually mean for you and long term? Sometimes one-on-one, sometimes as a whole company. There's a little education piece that's been added into our business. I think the second thing is, you wouldn't believe it, but there's way more accountability on me as a CEO. And it's really cool, let me tell you, because we already had, one of our core values is creating opportunities, and other one is empowering people, right? Like, that totally fits the employee ownership model. Everyone would hold each other accountable to that before, but it's kind of hard to call out the owner when he's not behaving. But as an ESOP, it feels like people are just a bit more transparent with each other and up to me, and I really appreciate that. So they say things like, hey, Shane, I thought we were going to X, or that goal doesn't seem attainable. Let's look at this. There's a little bit more, I don't know what the right word is, creativity being brought into the business. It feels like ideas aren't stopped before they get to me. And it feels like when ideas do get to me, I'm held accountable if I agree with those ideas. And that's propelled our business forward. I'll tell you, when we became an employee owned, we were like 250 employees, just starting to hit the number. We're now 310 employees. We're operating in three major areas. Now we have 4 major areas. We've added a couple major clients. Our share price came in double what the ESOP company thought it would come in at. People are getting statements, Kirsten. And our ESOP was set up a little differently because we gave credit for time served, and in the sense of hours worked. And there was people who woke up on June 1st of 2023 with $40,000 in an account that they didn't know they had before, right? And those people are putting that projection into their ESOP calculator online. Wescom is very fortunate to have a young team. We love our older folks too, but we're just fortunate in the sense that there's a lot of
Thanks for saying that, Shane.
No, we do, and they're awesome. But I'm saying we're fortunate because the ESOP really is going to benefit them even more so than our older folks, right? So because of the runway. And so when we announced our ESOP, I told everyone this, and I continue to talk about it a lot in our team meetings. There are two things you need for this to work out. You need time and you need hard work. If you have time and you add in hard work, we get a magical win. And there are people that are going to leave our employ in 20 years with $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million in their ESOP account.
So projections are short, you're saying?
Your projections were short, but that's not the only thing that's been short with you. My temper has probably even been short with you, Kirk. No, I think, so what really has changed is it's like increased optimism that we don't have to worry about our future. Like, we're just executing. And I think we all believe in each other. Like, this was not an easy transaction to pull off, and we pull it off. And so now let's go prove it to ourselves that we can keep this rolling. We did have, for the first time ever, our board a couple weeks ago went off-site. We spent 8 hours and we did a 10-year strategic planning session. I had never done that previous.
10 years.
Yeah, well, it was that
that's
10-year
right.
forecast that you guys
That's why
needed.
we couldn't do the podcast.
That's why we couldn't do the
Wait,
podcast.
and Kirk was on sabbatical.
Right. Isn't that weird that he was able to afford a sabbatical right after our ESOP transaction? I'm just saying. So the whole thing was, I think there's been an increased emphasis on long-term. That's maybe one change, and then the accountability would be another change. But honestly, Kirsten, the people out working, doing the good work at Wescom, they're just now getting statements once a year showing how much their valuation has increased. Nothing really else changed.
Well, and let me tell you, as a single mom that raised 5 kids, I could not put into a 401k. Something always had to be fixed, right? They would match it, but you still have to put in. And with an ESOP, they're coming to work, and that is how they put into their retirement plan, right?
Yeah, in our case it is, and I think it's great. I actually had John Pulley's data for me last week before our board retreat. 15% of our company used to contribute to our 401k. Post ESOP transaction, we're up to like 35-40%, which is just strange. Like, what happened, right? Well, I think there's a couple things that have happened. One is our business has done better, so naturally everyone's earnings have done better. And then secondly, through that big education piece of the ESOP journey, people are starting to say, well, wait a second. I never actually did this math. I never actually thought that it could change my future. Remember earlier when we talked, like, change starts right within our own back pockets, right within our own houses, right within our own communities. And I think that's been a little side benefit. But Kirk touched on it before. You know, we had a culture of ownership at Wescom. People, you'll hear it all the time now out in the field. Hey, turn that pickup off. I don't like to waste my gas. We wouldn't have heard that 3 years ago. Whether it's translated into anything financially, I'm not exactly certain. I haven't been able to tie those numbers, but certainly we've grown, and not just in revenue and income, but in people in the last year.
The employees at Wescom, I mean, the years of credit for years of service was a big thing. There was some extra contributions that we helped with a strategy to maximize some things at the company level and at the employee level. So those employees, day one, along with the communication, they understand what they're getting, and they see a number. There's a lot of momentum there, as I can imagine. Yeah. And then, plus, to your safety thing and shutting off trucks. The first time I'd ever had to back in anywhere was at Wescom.
I know, I didn't notice.
Part of the deal.
Kirk, this morning you didn't back in.
No, I got here too early. I wasn't sure I was in the right place.
You're both at the right place. Talking about employee ownership through an ESOP. So what would you say? You already had so much, and I know you just celebrated your year anniversary. Did you do anything? Are you doing anything special?
Oh, Kirsten, we're so terrible at this kind of stuff. Like I'm a deeply committed individual, and once I have like a plan, I just tend to execute. And so we get together every summer in every region, and we have a little picnic and a gathering with our employees and families and celebrate the prior year. We get together at Christmas with just the employee and their spouse and celebrate, kind of the business wins of the year. So we took this year's summer celebration and amped it up a little bit to say, hey, congrats, we're employee owned. We had just released the statement for everyone to see what their account balance was. And everyone got the standard t-shirts and all that kind of stuff that we do, but they also got some chairs, and we just played a bunch of ball with each other and just hung out and reminded each other, like, hey, we're actually a big old family, even though we're a few hundred people. The best times for us is when we're together and hanging out with each other and spiking a ball at each other. It's a good time. So our celebration has been somewhat limited, and partly it's because we as a leadership team are still learning the ESOP thing. I don't know what the right communication is to the employees. I don't want to blow smoke, right?
Right.
I want to give them real data. So people were like, oh, what are you going to do about the 1 year? Well, first of all, our valuation did come out real timely. It took us a while to get our valuation done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it was a first year, and Kirk, I didn't have that 10-year forecast put together the way I should have for the valuation company. So it just wasn't, the timing was throwing me off. And then plus, by the way, we're still trying to run a business, right? So we try and celebrate employee ownership at that picnic, and we try and come up with an employee ownership theme monthly that we hit on. Hey, when you leave your trucks running, we have a couple hundred pickups out in the field, right? When you leave those pickups running, that's costing money, which comes off the bottom line, which affects your shareholder price. More importantly, if you're not doing a really good job making money with your hands and feet and taking good care of a customer, they're not going to call us tomorrow, and they're not going to call us in 10 years. And now I'm blowing smoke around as to what our valuation might be.
Do you also find that the workers have better financial literacy as someone who is an employee owner? A lot of times when I worked, as I said, I probably had zero financial. It was, what can I do to make it to that next paycheck? Do you find that you work on financial literacy and help the employees learn? They're going to have to learn some new skills, right? Because they've been also not aware of how well a company's doing. That's typically not, right? Open books or great game of business. It's typically not how we run business in America. It's top down. And what I hear from you saying is now you're just broadening that base.
It's been so fun, Kirsten, to do that. We just kicked off a 6-module financial course for all of our employees. 3 weeks ago, I was over in North Dakota at my apartment. I dial in. This is at 6 o'clock at night, okay? And these are folks who are working 12-hour days, 72 hours a week, some of them. There's 49 people specifically dialed into this Teams call for Module 1 on personal budget and finance. And who knows how many people were in the room with them, right? So at our conference room in Duluth, at our conference room in New Mexico, spouses were invited to the event. I think that was incredible. And those 50 people, roughly, had such a lively discussion. We hired a financial firm. They did a presentation, Module 1 of 6. It ends, at the end of it is investing for the future. And so we want to start with the basics, and we're going to work in the ESOP along this journey. But really, before I can teach people about business finances, we have to learn about our own finances. And our leadership team has always been somewhat involved, but they continue to get deeper and deeper. Last year, all the gloves came off as far as books for the senior leadership team. That's been a really interesting thing for them to see how the decisions boil up and what profit actually means.
Accountability.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean money in the bank necessarily, and all of these things. But we want to start with personal finance. And like I said, we found, when we started Wescom back in 2013, the ownership group at that time said, we don't believe in 401ks, we don't believe in retirement, we just love real estate. I don't like real estate because I don't know real estate. I stink at real estate. I love investing though. And so we started a 401k, and I said, well, you don't have to put money in there, but I need a 401k because whatever. And so we started one, and today we have almost $8 million in our 401k as a company.
That's a pretty amazing story. Both of you. I have a really in-depth question that I ask everyone. What do you think could help expand broad employee ownership in Minnesota? Are there things, for instance, I believe if we could find a way to have funding for exploration of employee ownership, any form, right? Broad employee ownership to get a feasibility study or to do evaluation. And then if you transact to employee owned, that grant is forgiven. If you transact to a traditional, you pay back a little bit at a time. What are some of the levers we can pull at the local and state level to perhaps help employee ownership be a more accessible to everyone who's an entrepreneur, just not people that somehow researched? You were a natural researcher, you loved it, but what about the people that are just running their business and going home and having dinner every night because they're exhausted?
Yeah, I think education is the key, and maybe I'll start. As you know, Kirsten, at the federal level, there has been some monies available for ESOP education, for feasibility, for some of these programs. Now, how that gets appropriate and if it gets appropriate, I think is another discussion. But there is some bills out there where there's language in there that's supporting that at the federal level. Also, I would say, just in the press, employee ownership and ESOPs they're a bipartisan issue. You got both sides of the aisle pushing forward on employee ownership, and whether that's more jobs, better jobs, retirement, whatever side of the aisle people are on, everybody's behind that. So that momentum is tremendous from what we're seeing at the federal level, and even some of the candidates right now are supporting. They have come out and supported the employee ownership concept. At the state level, I think that is, MNCEO is a perfect example of hey, organizations that are getting on board, the state centers. There's lots of states that provide those types of benefits. So back to I guess your question on what we can do. I think the more education and the more people we talk to, the better off that's going to be, because that stuff will get appropriated. Those monies will get to certain places. I think Minnesota actually has some financing options at some of the at maybe one of the development organizations there. So things like that are popping up all over, and it just needs to be broadcast more and more transparency, I guess, on those great programs. Because the proof is in the pudding too, right? You can go out to any website and look at return on investment for ESOP companies, and the stats are overwhelming when you compare them to a non-ESOP company. So if that money gets appropriated to these formations, or whether it's a second stage transaction or just general dollars, there's going to be ROI that shows, hey, this is working, because it's already working without it. In my opinion.
And sometimes you find out your favorite companies are ESOPs. It's weird. Once you become an ESOP, or when you're on that journey, you start like, well, no wonder why all those people ask me if they can help me when I walk in the store. They're an ESOP. They actually care. I think the work that Minnesota CEO is doing, the Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership, is a good step. I was frustrated when I went to go research employee ownership that everywhere I went felt like I was getting sold to. And as a business owner and an entrepreneur, I can't stand being sold to. And so I like non-biased, non-cost information that's just very real. And I especially love it if I can relate to the story. And so the storytelling, no matter what you're doing anywhere in life, is so important to make it like a real story. No fluff, no lie about it. This was a bumpy transaction. We had to work really, really hard to go through it. But at the end of the day, there's 300 people in 20 years who get to retire, possibly with $500,000 each. Do you want to change the world? Start in your own back pocket. That's not why we did it. I don't believe I did it because I wanted people to be a millionaire, right? I did it, Jeremy and I, because we wanted the future earnings of the company to go right where they belong, and that is to the people doing the work. There's a big disconnect in today's world between the haves and the have-nots, and it's usually the haves. They've earned it. They've went and done their hard work and everything, but where does that end, right? Like when you put the future earnings of the company into the people that are doing the work, everyone involved gets a better outcome. The employee ends up better financially. The community ends up better because the money is sticking around that said community. The community is better served because the people care about their company more. It's a win-win-win-win. But in order for people to know about it, we got to share the story. And I think as humans, it's not always so comfortable to share financial stories, right? I'm not comfortable sharing the intimate details of the transaction.
I'd like to share those. I thought we did some pretty creative things that fit everybody.
Right. Well, you can certainly you can share them. I would have never thought growing up, when literally I remember one particular night that an individual, I had an upstairs bedroom. And as I said, we were in poverty. We had what we needed, but barely. And door slammed early in the morning. Like, that's weird. Who left? Right? So I boogie downstairs, and then we had this entryway in the entry door, before the outside had shut. And I see a man in a jacket headed out the front door. And in the entryway, there was 4 boxes of food. And do you have any idea how excited I was for my mother to wake up? Somebody had dropped off ham and all kinds of food for us. That is literally what happened. Now today, I was lucky enough to have a business that went from 5 people to 300 people, providing I have had more than I ever thought was possible. I've traveled the country, meeting all kinds of incredible people, finding out that people in business suits are just normal people, trying to do their job well, even if they're in a Houston tower. I've met people who've been divorced 4 times. I've met people who've been down on their luck and they're out working 72 hours and they're sending their money across the border. They're sending it to their families over in Utah and they're thriving as people. I run into them 20 years later or 10 years later and they're like, hey, I used to work for you then and here's my story. It's awesome. I got everything. The cream of, like, the best part of it is I was able to be in the business and recognize my investment in a monetary way, but I get to still do what I love doing. I didn't go into business for the money. I ended up in business. So I'm probably unique that way. I ended up in business. And I just feel incredibly lucky that I was able to capitalize on that investment and I get to still work with the people I love. So I think the more we can share those stories, and someday I'll be gone, my kids will be gone or somebody will be gone, and maybe there'll be another story about the financial details on a transaction like that. But suffice it to say that I'm a very lucky individual.
Clearly, Shane is going to leave the legacy that he started. But that's what employee ownership is. Your legacy. You'll be remembered, but somebody will remember you.
Well,
I
probably for the right.
I probably will.
You'll remember that one cheap client you had, right?
Don't you give me grief.
I don't think it's always about the legacy either for people. It probably can be. But for me, it's about the future for the people that you're leaving.
Yeah.
It's not about you. It's about them.
Right.
And that's why employee ownership is so cool. You can get it about you. You can take your money and you can run. Or you can take your money and you can keep working. Either way, the people win. That's what I love about it.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Worker Co podcast. This podcast is a project of the Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership. If this podcast stirred hope and curiosity in you, and you are interested in learning more about employee ownership, please reach out. MNCEO is here to provide connections and resources to guide you as you consider employee ownership. Our website is www.mnceo.org. Thanks again for being part of this conversation with the Worker Co podcast. Hope to see you again.